The first American election was entirely unanimous. As George Washington stepped up to lead our newly born country at the first inauguration, he said, "In these honorable qualifications I behold the surest pledges, that on one side no local prejudices or attachments, no separate views nor party animosities will misdirect the comprehensive and equal eye which ought to water over this great assemblage of community and interests." Somehow, we got here.
They're eating the dogs.
I am certainly not Donald Trump.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just say here, this is
the people on television say my dog was taken and used for food.
People start leaving his rallies early.
Even with my limited knowledge of politics and life, something about this election feels especially weird. With a couple days until the polls are closed and the votes are tallied, there seems to be an equal amount of vigor and hopelessness about politics in America. Without further ado, please join me on this journey of studying our past, informing our present, and directing our future. It's impossible to talk about campaigns without money. And you can't talk about campaign money without the 2010 Citizens United versus FEC decision and the ensuing rise of super PACs and dark money. In a 5-4 decision, the court ruled that corporations are people and money is speech. Therefore, limits on campaign spending are a violation of First Amendment rights. This overturned over 100 years of precedent and is incredibly detrimental to the integrity of politicians because of corporate interests and lobby groups. Now, PAC stands for Political Action Committee, and although they're not directly tied to the campaign, they do certainly have influence and communication with the campaign when they're coordinating strategy for things like their advertising campaigns. Traditional PACs have limits on how much they can spend per candidate per election, but super PACs do not. Not only do super PACs have no limits on how much they can spend on a candidate, but there's only one layer of disclosure when it comes to figuring out who donated to these super PACs. If I'm a rich person and I don't want the public to know that I donated $10 million to Joe Schmo's campaign, what I would do is create a group with a vague name, something that a lot of Americans could get behind, like the Save the Kids group, or something stupid like that. Now, my Save the Kids group can donate tens of millions of dollars to any campaign at any time, and no one will know where the money came from. Hopefully, this is the only time that the Supreme Court overturns a decades-long decision that millions of Americans support. Right? In 2018, the top 100 donors to super PACs donated 76% of campaign funds to these super PACs. That is a lot of influence for a very small minority of Americans. This leads us to today, where Elon Musk is using his super PAC to donate $1 million a day to voters in Pennsylvania who register as a Republican. This problem is getting worse and worse election over election, and all it's doing is making politicians feel less like everyday Americans and more like corporate drones. In a country where the top 10% of Americans own 67% of the wealth, the top 0.1% of Americans own 13.5% of the wealth, and the bottom 50% own 2.5% of the wealth. This does nothing to benefit everyday Americans and only allows corporate interests to bankroll elections and buy support in the White House and Congress. If you're wondering why we're back here, instead of on location like our invigorating campaign finance section, let's keep going. With the rise of technology and human advancement, the strategy to win an electoral college election has become incredibly refined. The electoral college is a complicated and archaic system where getting the most votes doesn't necessarily secure the win. The total number of electoral points any given state has is based on how many representatives in Congress they have. Because the minimum number of representatives a state can have is 3, 2 senators and 1 congressperson. This minimum is the reason why people's votes in Wyoming, for example, have more gravity on a national election than people's votes in California, because some counties in California have more people than the entirety of the state of Wyoming. The 2 most notable electoral college performances in recent history is the 2000 Bush versus Gore election and the 2016 Clinton versus Trump election, both of which the winner lost the popular vote, albeit in different ways. But there's about 4 to 8 states in any given election that are the real difference makers on who wins on election night. That being said, anything can happen on election day, and we are seeing that with states like Virginia, Florida, North Carolina, and New Mexico inching closer and closer day by day. One of the most interesting things about this election is the complex incumbency advantage, or lack thereof. Neither is currently sitting president. However, Kamala Harris is the vice president of the current Democratic office. Donald Trump is also a former president and has been very active in the political scene since his loss to Joe Biden in 2020. Vice President Harris was also not even the presumptive nominee for president as of 3 months ago, when Joe Biden's campaign abruptly ended. She had yet to truly introduce herself to the public. and she jump-started her campaign with a very aligned message and a strong in-touch outreach, being one of the first to utilize apps like TikTok with significant involvement in many trends. The job of the vice presidency is incredibly thankless, with very limited control of what you do and where you go whenever the president needs you. This poses one of the biggest hurdles of the Harris campaign, trying to find that simultaneous balance between individuality and distance from the campaign, while constantly being held accountable for all your boss's actions, except for that one time, and the everyday challenges of holding office and running a campaign. Former President Trump has found immense success campaigning around the idea that life was better under his administration as opposed to the current one. The Trump campaign's issues have to do with his scandals. Former President Trump is certainly not the first president with scandals, and not even the first president to have scandals while holding office. Donald Trump has been found guilty and is currently awaiting sentencing on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records, while also awaiting trial on an extraordinary conspiracy charge related to January 6th, 49 state felony charges related to interference with Georgia's 2020 election results, and 37 felony counts of violating the Espionage Act and obstructing justice. This is all just currently, as he has been involved or is currently involved in over 4,000 lawsuits pertaining to all sorts of things. Incredibly, despite all this, he is well within the margin of error in many national polls and is leading in many others. Even with Donald Trump's obvious influence with the courts leading to the delay of most of his trials until after the election, only retrospect can enlighten us on how this will turn out in this election. It is impossible to completely remove all implicit bias in how I presented you this information, which is why I chose to focus on context rather than policy. So out of respect for all my past English teachers, I have cited all my sources in the description if you are curious about learning more for yourself. Full disclosure, I am extraordinarily excited to cast my first presidential vote for Kamala Harris on Tuesday, both on policy and character. I believe that she is a leader that will fight for the interests of all Americans, not just those with the amplified voices. I believe that politics is an art, and if politics is an art, then conversation is the paint. If you don't know how to feel about an issue, or you feel like you just don't care, reach out to your friends, your family, any loved ones, your neighbor, anyone in your community that you think would have valuable insight, and talk to them. I think no matter what side of the aisle you're on, we can all agree that this election is particularly odd, and that we should all remember that having conversations with the people around us is the best way to learn more about issues. Democracy is exceptionally challenging, and it works best when everyone's involved in it. So with that being said, go vote. If not just for yourself, but for your community. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.